The Zephyr had always seen humans as nothing more than an odd, fragile species, emotional, unpredictable, and, in their eyes, weak. They watched Earth from afar, amused by humanity's constant conflicts and petty squabbles. The Zephyr Empire had conquered dozens of worlds, subjugated countless species, and never faced a real challenge. So when Captain Vrex decided to kidnap Earth's top diplomat during a peace summit, he believed it would be a simple power move, a lesson to remind humans of their place in the galaxy. The abduction was swift. The human diplomat, Sarah Keller, had barely stepped off her ship when the Zephyr forces surrounded her, dragging her into their sleek, dark cruiser. Vrex smirked as Keller stared him down, her eyes calm despite the blasters pointed at her. He thought it was fear masked as bravery, but it wasn't fear. Not even close. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Sarah Keller wasn't just any diplomat. She was a symbol of unity, a figure who had brokered peace not just between nations, but between entire planets. Her disappearance wasn't just an attack on one person. It was an attack on humanity itself. For the first time in decades, Earth fell silent. No debates in the United Nations, no arguments on news channels, just silence. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of something ancient waking up, something the Zephyr had never seen before. Humanity's true nature. Captain Vrex waited for Earth's response. He expected desperate pleas for negotiation, maybe some weak threats. But hours passed, then days, and nothing came. No messages, no diplomats begging for Keller's return. Just silence. At first, Vrex laughed it off. "They're probably too scared to respond," he told his crew. "Humans are soft." But his officers began to notice something strange. The usual human ships that patrolled the outer edges of their solar system were gone. Their space stations, normally buzzing with activity, were eerily quiet. It wasn't just Earth that had gone silent. Their entire space fleet had vanished. And then the dreams started. Vrex's crew reported strange, vivid nightmares. Dreams of shadows moving in the dark, of cold, piercing eyes watching them from nowhere. Some swore they heard whispers in their minds, voices speaking in languages they didn't understand. At first, Vrex dismissed it as stress. But even he couldn't ignore the growing unease spreading through his ship. The once proud Zephyr soldiers, who had faced countless battles, were now jumpy, paranoid. Something wasn't right. In the deepest part of his mind, Vrex began to wonder, had they underestimated the humans? But by the time he realized the truth, it was already too late. Because humans don't respond with words. They respond with something far more terrifying. And the Zephyr were about to find out exactly what that meant. Captain Vrex lounged in his command chair, the hum of the Zephyr cruiser's engines, a familiar comfort beneath him. The silence from Earth still lingered, but Vrex wasn't concerned. In his mind, humans were just slow to react, still trying to figure out how to save face after the embarrassment he'd handed them. He pictured Earth's leaders scrambling, arguing among themselves like frightened children, unsure of how to deal with a superior force. It amused him, but his crew didn't share his confidence. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Officers exchanged nervous glances, their once crisp discipline starting to fray. The silence from Earth was no longer just silence. It was oppressive, heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Vrex noticed it, but dismissed it as weakness among his crew. They were letting their imaginations get the better of them. After all, humans were emotional creatures. This was probably some kind of tactic, a bluff to buy time. But time for what? The first signs of real unease began when the scout ships sent to monitor Earth's orbit stopped reporting in. One after another, the small, agile Zephyr crafts simply vanished from the communication grid. No distress signals, no warnings, just gone. At first, Vrex assumed it was a technical glitch. He ordered a second wave of scouts. They disappeared too. Now, The crew whispered in hushed tones when they thought Vrex wasn't listening. Stories of humans wielding strange, unseen technology began to circulate. Some said Earth had allied with another powerful species, one that had given them advanced weapons far beyond the Zyphar's understanding. Others believed humans were hiding something darker, something ancient. Vrex sneered at the rumors. He wouldn't let superstition take root on his ship, but even he couldn't ignore the facts. Ships don't just vanish. Communications don't just go dark. Something was happening out there, and he didn't have an explanation. He ordered the ship's sensors to scan for any unusual activity, but the results only deepened the mystery. The space around Earth was empty, too empty. There were no signs of human ships, no satellite signals, no defense systems online. It was as if humanity had simply packed up and left. But Vrex knew better. Humans weren't the kind to run. That night, the nightmares grew worse. Officers and soldiers woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, babbling about dark shapes and cold, emotionless eyes staring at them through the void of space. One of his lieutenants, a hardened veteran who'd fought in dozens of campaigns, collapsed in the middle of the bridge, clutching his head and muttering, "They're coming. They're already here," before being dragged away to the medbay. Vrex's patience was wearing thin. He was a captain of the Zyphar Empire, a conqueror of worlds. He wouldn't be undone by fear and ghost stories. But deep down, something gnawed at him. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how humans were supposed to react. Still, he refused to show weakness. He broadcast a message to Earth, loud and clear. "Return communication immediately, or we will consider this an act of war. Your diplomat's life depends on your cooperation." He expected a response, maybe a desperate plea, maybe a threat. But nothing came. The crew waited in silence, eyes fixed on the empty space beyond the ship's viewing windows. Minutes turned into hours. Still, no response. Then the lights on the bridge flickered. It was just for a second, but in that brief flicker, every screen went black, and the hum of the engines faltered. When the lights came back, the crew stared at their consoles in horror. All navigational systems were offline. Communications were dead. The ship was floating, powerless, in the vast emptiness of space. Vrex barked orders, demanding explanations. His engineers scrambled to diagnose the issue, but no one had answers. Everything was perfectly intact, no damage, no malfunctions, yet nothing worked. It was as if the ship itself had been disconnected from reality. And then they saw it. Out of the blackness, a single human ship appeared. It wasn't large, not compared to the Zyphar cruiser, but it moved with a quiet, terrifying confidence. No weapons were visible, no signals broadcasted. It just drifted closer, silent, and still, like a predator stalking its prey. Vrex stared at the ship, a cold knot forming in his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt something he couldn't suppress. Fear. The humans weren't negotiating. They weren't begging. They weren't even threatening. They were watching. And Captain Vrex began to realize humanity's silence wasn't weakness. It was a warning. Captain Vrex sat motionless in his command chair, his eyes locked on the small human ship that hovered just outside the viewport. It didn't move aggressively, didn't flash its weapons or send any threats. It simply drifted there, like it was waiting for something. The silence on the Zyphar cruiser's bridge was suffocating. Every officer, every soldier felt it. The unspoken tension that gripped them tighter with each passing second. Vrex's second-in-command, Officer Dron, finally broke the silence. "Captain, we should fire. Show them they can't intimidate us with." The lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The bridge plunged into complete darkness. Only the faint glow from the emergency backup systems provided any light, casting long, eerie shadows across the crew's faces. Panic began to ripple through the ranks. Officers scrambled at their consoles, frantically trying to restore power, but nothing responded. The ship was dead. Vrex's voice, usually sharp and commanding, wavered slightly as he barked. "Report. What's happening?" No one had an answer. The diagnostic systems were down. The communications array was unresponsive. Even the life support systems flickered dangerously. It wasn't an attack in the traditional sense. There were no explosions, no visible damage. But the ship was being dismantled from the inside. Its very systems turned against them. And then, as if to drive the message home, the Zephyr fleet orbiting Earth began to go dark one by one. On the few functioning screens left on the bridge, Vrex could see the status indicators for the other ships in his fleet blinking out like dying stars. First, the Zephyr's Pride, then the Oblivion's Edge, and then the Crimson Fang. Ships that had once been symbols of Zephyr dominance were now powerless husks, floating aimlessly in space. This isn't possible," Dron whispered, his usual arrogance replaced by disbelief. "Humans don't have this kind of technology. They can't." But they did. Vrex's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Humans weren't supposed to be capable of this. Their ships were inferior, their weapons outdated compared to the Zephyr's advanced arsenal. But somehow, Earth had found a way to cripple an entire fleet without firing a single shot. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the emergency systems flickered back to life. The main view screen powered on, and Vrex expected to see static or more of the empty space. Instead, a single image filled the screen. It was Sarah Keller. The human diplomat they had kidnapped stood calmly in what appeared to be a dimly lit room, her face illuminated by a soft, flickering light. She looked directly into the camera, her expression cold and unreadable. There was no fear in her eyes, only something far more dangerous: determination. She spoke, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the oppressive silence of the bridge. "You made a mistake, Captain Vrex." Vrex felt a chill run down his spine. "You thought humanity was weak because we value peace, because we show mercy. But you've misunderstood who we are. We don't start wars." The camera zoomed out slightly, revealing the shattered remains of what was once a Zephyr command console behind her. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and the walls were scorched, evidence of a battle fought and won. "But when you take from us, when you harm our people, we don't stop. We don't negotiate. We end you." The screen flickered again, and the image shifted. Now, Vrex saw live footage of Earth's forces, ships that had been hidden, cloaked in a way the Zephyr sensors had never detected. They moved silently, methodically, surrounding the remaining Zephyr ships like wolves encircling wounded prey. And still, not a single shot was fired. The message was clear. Humans didn't need to fire. They had already won. Panic fully erupted on the bridge. Officers shouted over one another, demanding orders, begging for solutions. Some even tried to flee, though there was nowhere to go. The crew's discipline, once the pride of the Zephyr fleet, disintegrated in the face of the impossible. But Captain Vrex, he sat frozen, his mind unable to process what was happening. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. Not because of superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but because of something far more terrifying: humanity's resolve. They didn't need to destroy his fleet. They wanted him to watch as everything he controlled was stripped away, piece by piece. They wanted him to feel the helplessness, the fear, the realization that there was nothing he could do to stop them. Because humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were sending a message. And Vrex finally understood what that message was. You don't make humans angry. Because when you do, they don't just fight back. They make sure you never forget the mistake you made. Captain Vrex's ship drifted aimlessly in space, a powerless husk surrounded by the quiet hum of human warships. They didn't advance, didn't fire. They just lingered in the shadows like predators, savoring the fear of their prey. Every second stretched into an unbearable eternity for the Zephyr crew, their once proud confidence dissolving into quiet panic. The silence on the bridge was broken only by the irregular beeping of a failing life support system and the hushed whispers of terrified officers. They were seasoned soldiers, veterans of countless battles across the galaxy. Yet now, faced with the unblinking, silent threat of humanity, they were paralyzed. Vrex sat stiff in his command chair, staring at the image on the main screen. Sarah Keller's words echoed in his mind. "We don't start wars, but we end them." He had thought she was bluffing, that her calm demeanor was a last act of defiance from a powerless species. But now, as his fleet was systematically dismantled without a single shot fired, Vrex realized she had been dead serious. The human ships began to move, but not in the way Vrex expected. There was no bombardment, no lasers lighting up the void of space. Instead, they acted with chilling precision. One by one, they approached the Zyphar vessels, targeting specific weak points in their infrastructure. Their weapons weren't designed to destroy, but to disable. Energy pulses struck communication arrays, navigation systems, and weapon controls, rendering each ship inert without causing catastrophic damage. It was as if the humans were deliberately avoiding complete destruction, choosing instead to leave the Zyphar ships floating helplessly in space. Vrex's second-in-command, Officer Dron, slammed his fist against his console. "We can't just sit here. We have to fight back." But the desperation in his voice betrayed his bravado. There was nothing left to fight with. Their weapons were offline, their defenses useless. Even if they could launch an attack, the human ships were faster, more agile, and armed with technology the Zyphar had never encountered. Still, Vrex couldn't bring himself to order a retreat. His pride wouldn't allow it. The Zyphar were conquerors, the dominant force in this sector of the galaxy. To flee from a species they had once considered inferior was unthinkable. But the truth was undeniable. The humans weren't just superior in technology, they were superior in will. Suddenly, the main screen flickered, and a new image appeared. It wasn't Sarah Keller this time. It was a live feed from one of the remaining Zyphar ships, the Zyphar's Pride. Vrex watched in horror as the human warships breached its hull with surgical precision. The feed showed Zyphar soldiers being overrun by human marines, their movements swift and efficient. There was no hesitation, no mercy. The humans weren't there to negotiate. They were there to make a statement. As the feed cut out, Vrex felt a cold sweat drip down his back. The Zyphar's Pride had been their most powerful ship, the pride of their fleet. Its fall was a message to the rest of the Zyphar Empire. Humanity was not to be trifled with. Vrex's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp noise, a high-pitched whine that grew louder with each passing second. The bridge crew covered their ears, grimacing in pain. Then, as abruptly as it started, the noise stopped. The lights flickered back to life, and for a brief moment, Vrex thought they had regained control. But then he saw the message flashing across every screen on the bridge. "We are inside your systems. You cannot escape. You will surrender." The message repeated over and over, in perfect Zyphar script. Vrex's blood ran cold. The humans had not only disabled their ships, they had infiltrated their very systems. They knew their weaknesses, their strategies, even their language. The Zyphar were completely exposed. Vrex felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He had underestimated humanity, and now his crew was paying the price. But surrender was not an option. The Zyphar Code demanded they fight to the last breath, even in the face of certain death. Yet, as he looked around the bridge, he saw the truth in his crew's eyes. They were broken. The psychological warfare waged by the humans had succeeded where brute force had failed. The Zyphar were a proud species, but pride meant nothing in the face of such overwhelming, calculated power. And then, as if to cement their dominance, the humans made their final move. Without warning, the human ships activated a new wave of attacks. This time, they targeted the Zyphar life support systems. The air grew thin, and the temperature on the bridge began to drop rapidly. Frost formed on the consoles, and the crew's breath came out in visible puffs. It wasn't enough to kill them, just enough to remind them of their vulnerability. Vrex realized the humans weren't trying to end them quickly. They wanted the Zephyr to suffer, to feel every ounce of fear and helplessness they had inflicted on others. This was more than revenge, it was a lesson. As the temperature continued to drop, Vrex finally understood the true nature of humanity's wrath. They didn't rage like wild beasts. Their anger was cold, methodical, and unstoppable. They would dismantle their enemies piece by piece, ensuring that no one would ever dare cross them again. And as the lights dimmed and the cold seeped into his bones, Captain Vrex knew this was the end of the Zephyr fleet. But it wasn't the end of humanity's message. Captain Vrex stared out of the frosted viewport, his breath forming faint clouds in the freezing air of the bridge. His crew moved sluggishly, their bodies slowed by the thin, cold atmosphere. The once mighty Zephyr fleet now drifted helplessly in orbit around Earth, reduced to silent, powerless wrecks. But Vrex knew the worst was yet to come. Humans didn't cripple an enemy just to leave them in space. No, they had something far more devastating planned. And then it began. Without a sound, the human warships broke formation and turned toward the Zephyr home planet, Zephyr Prime, light years away. It wasn't just an act of retaliation, it was a declaration. Humanity wasn't satisfied with disabling the fleet. They intended to bring the entire Zephyr Empire to its knees. The crew of Rex's ship watched in horror as the human ships disappeared into the void, their hyperdrives leaving streaks of light across the dark expanse of space. Vrex's comm systems were still down, but he could imagine the chaos unfolding on Zephyr Prime. The Empire's leaders, confident in their untouchable power, would never see it coming. They believed the fleet orbiting Earth was more than enough to keep humanity in check. They had no idea what was heading their way. Vrex's heart pounded with a mix of fear and guilt. He had started this war with a single reckless act, the kidnapping of Sarah Keller. But now that small decision had set off a chain reaction that threatened to wipe out the Zephyr civilization itself, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Hours passed like days aboard the crippled ship. The crew huddled in the cold, their minds racing with dark thoughts. They had always believed themselves to be the galaxy's superior species, conquerors, rulers, untouchable. But the humans had shown them just how wrong they were. Their silence wasn't weakness. Their emotions weren't flaws. They were strengths, weapons more powerful than any laser or plasma cannon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the comm systems flickered to life. Static crackled through the bridge, and Vrex rushed to the console, desperate for any news from Zephyr Prime. But what came through wasn't a message from his leaders. It was a broadcast from the humans. The image on the screen showed Zephyr Prime, once a bustling, vibrant world, now plunged into chaos. Human ships hovered in the planet's atmosphere, their presence alone enough to send the population into a frenzy. Explosions dotted the surface as key infrastructure was systematically destroyed. Power plants, military outposts, communication hubs, all targeted with surgical precision. But it wasn't total destruction. No, the humans were careful to leave the cities intact, to spare the civilian population. They wanted the Zephyr people to witness the fall of their empire. Then the image shifted to the Zephyr High Council chamber. The once proud leaders of the Zephyr Empire were on their knees, their faces pale with fear. And standing in front of them was Sarah Keller. She was unharmed, her clothes pristine, her posture calm and composed. She held no weapon, but her presence was more powerful than any force Vrex had ever encountered. She looked directly into the camera, and Vrex felt her gaze pierce through him, even across the vast distance between Earth and Zephyr Prime. "This is what happens when you threaten humanity," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "We do not seek war. We do not crave power. But if you harm our people, if you disrespect our sovereignty, we will respond. And our response will be absolute." The High Council remained silent, their fear palpable. Sarah took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. You will release all prisoners of war. You will dismantle your military forces. And you will never, ever interfere with humanity again. If you fail to comply, we will return. And next time, we won't be so merciful. With that, the feed cut off, leaving Vrex and his crew in stunned silence. The message was clear. Humanity had not only defeated the Zephyr fleet, but had brought the entire empire to its knees without firing a single shot in anger. They had used precision, strategy, and psychological warfare to break the Zephyr spirit. The crew aboard Vrex's ship slumped in their seats, the weight of their defeat sinking in. They weren't just beaten. They were humiliated. The Zephyr Empire, once the dominant force in the galaxy, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. Vrex stood slowly, his body aching from the cold and the weight of his failure. He looked around at his crew, their faces hollow with despair. He had led them into this disaster, blinded by arrogance and underestimating humanity's resolve. But as he stared out into the void, Vrex realized something even more terrifying than their defeat. Humanity wasn't just a powerful enemy. They were a force of nature, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had taught. You don't make humans angry, because when you do, they don't just win. They make sure you'll never even think of challenging them again. In the aftermath of the devastating defeat, the Zephyr Empire lay in shambles. The High Council had no choice but to submit to humanity's demands. The prisoners were released, the military was disbanded, and the once proud fleets were recalled to their homeworld, their weapons dismantled before the eyes of a galaxy that had always feared them. The Zephyr had been reduced to a fractured shadow of their former strength, and no amount of bravado could mask the humiliation they felt. On Zephyr Prime, the citizens watched in silence as the remnants of their empire's warships returned home. Instead of triumphant celebrations, there was only a grim, muted acknowledgement of failure. The vast shipyards that had once produced the galaxy's most feared vessels were now silent, their operations shut down. Even the bustling capital city, once teeming with activity, felt subdued. Markets remained closed, grand halls stood empty, and even the planet's vast orbital stations were eerily quiet, stripped of their armaments, and filled only with disheartened maintenance crews. The humans, however, had not yet finished. As the Zephyr population struggled to come to terms with their new reality, a message arrived. Unlike the previous warnings, this communication did not come from a diplomat or military leader. Instead, it was a simple recording sent to every communication terminal on Zephyr Prime. The image on the screen was a stark, almost serene view of Earth. Blue oceans glinted in the sunlight, clouds drifted lazily over green continents, and space stations hovered in low orbit, their lights a calm reminder of humanity's presence. A calm, steady voice spoke over the image. It wasn't Sarah Keller this time. It was someone else, a faceless representative of Earth who delivered a clear, unembellished message. You have seen what we are capable of. We will not say this twice. If you ever threaten humanity again, if you even consider disrupting the peace of this galaxy, we will come back, and we will end you. There will be no negotiations, no second chances. This is your final warning. The screen went dark. No dramatic music, no further commentary. Just a simple, chilling conclusion to what had already been a devastating campaign. On the bridge of his crippled ship, Captain Vrex replayed the message in his mind. He had been brought back to Zephyr Prime as a prisoner of his own people. Though no one dared to execute him, he was still a war hero to many. His name had become synonymous with the Empire's downfall. As the days turned into weeks, he roamed the corridors of the great Imperial Palace, a free man in title but a prisoner in every other sense. The whispered voices of former allies followed him wherever he went. They blamed him for the losses, for the humiliation, for the fact that the Zephyr Empire would never again rise to its former glory. But what haunted Vrex more than his people's scorn was the realization that humanity had not destroyed them out of malice or revenge. The humans had acted with a cold, deliberate intent to teach a lesson, not just to the Zephyr, but to the entire galaxy. They didn't relish in their victory. They didn't celebrate their domination. They simply sent a message and moved on, confident that no one would dare challenge them again. As Vrex wandered the abandoned halls of the once great imperial shipyards, he saw the faces of the workers who had once built mighty warships, now reduced to performing routine maintenance on the few vessels that remained. He overheard whispered conversations about Earth, stories of how the humans had turned their fleets invisible, how they had hacked into Zephyr systems with a precision no one could match. And always, those who spoke would end their tales with a simple truth that everyone now accepted. The humans had become the galaxy's ultimate deterrent. Back on Earth, things were different. There were no grand parades, no public displays of dominance. Humanity simply continued on, their leaders quietly ensuring that the Zephyr would never recover their military strength. They established new trade routes, rebuilt alliances, and strengthened their technological capabilities. The humans didn't boast about their victory. They prepared for the next challenge, should one arise. But it was clear that their message had been received by all. The Zephyr were broken, and no other empire would dare rise against them. As time passed, the Zephyr High Council tried to rebuild their society, turning their focus inward. Without a military to maintain, they invested in agriculture, in education, in science. They became a more peaceful civilization by necessity. But beneath the surface, resentment lingered. Vrex knew it. The council knew it. The people knew it. The shame of their defeat festered, and though they had no means to fight back, the memory of what humanity had done was etched into their collective psyche. For years, Vrex lived in exile, a reminder of the Empire's greatest failure. He often wondered what might have happened if he had never taken Sarah Keller. Perhaps the humans would have remained a curiosity, a species known for their unpredictability and emotional depth, but not feared as conquerors. Yet, deep down, Vrex knew that humanity's strength had always been there. It had only taken his mistake to awaken it. A message from Earth would echo in his mind until the day he died. You will never threaten humanity again. And the galaxy would never forget those words. Years after the war, the galaxy had changed in subtle yet undeniable ways. The Zephyr Empire, once the preeminent power in the sector, had become something different, humble, subdued, cautious. Where once their name had been spoken with a mix of awe and fear, now it was accompanied by whispers of shame and bitter nostalgia. Their grand fleets, reduced to obsolete patrol ships, drifted through their own territories, like relics of a bygone era. It was a strange sight, one that served as a constant reminder of humanity's unexpected wrath. For the humans, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after an event that shifted the balance of interstellar power. They didn't expand their influence, didn't plant flags on conquered planets, didn't demand tributes or subservience. Instead, they simply existed. Their ships were seen less often, patrolling their own borders, their advanced technology, a quiet but undeniable presence. They made no more threats, issued no ultimatums. But everyone knew that behind their silence lay a capacity for devastation that no one dared provoke again. Other species, watching from a distance, began to reconsider their approach to humans. Some reached out with cautious offers of trade and alliance, careful to show respect and avoid even the faintest hint of hostility. Others retreated into their own territories, deciding that if humans were content to keep to themselves, it was best not to draw attention. Over time, the story of the Zephyr's fall became legend, passed down from one generation to the next. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a lesson etched into the collective consciousness of the galaxy. Vrex lived out his days on a remote colony world, far from the bustling capitals and gleaming cities of Zephyra Prime. He was left alone, neither revered nor reviled. The Zephyr government didn't see the point in punishing him further. He had already become a symbol of their greatest failure. But exile didn't bring him peace. The memory of those silent human ships, those unblinking threats, haunted him. He spent hours staring at the stars, wondering how a species so small and divided could have brought such an overwhelming force to bear? In the quiet of his isolation, he often muttered to himself, asking a question he knew would never be answered. Why did they let us live? For the Zyphar people, the rebuilding process was slow. Without a military budget to sustain, their economy began to shift toward infrastructure, education, and diplomacy. They reopened trade routes, but now on equal terms. They participated in interstellar councils, where once they had dictated terms. Some within the empire found this new direction humiliating. Others found it liberating. But no one could argue with the results. Peace returned, commerce thrived, and younger generations grew up without knowing the terror of war. Yet, beneath the surface, there was still a quiet resentment. The older generation remembered the days when the Zyphar name struck fear into the hearts of their rivals. They spoke of the old fleets, the great conquests, the leaders who had once stood unchallenged. These conversations always ended with a single, unavoidable conclusion. Humanity had taken that away from them, and the humans didn't need to boast or posture. Their silence was worse. It was as if they knew they had nothing to prove. As the years turned into decades, a peculiar phenomenon began to occur. Human culture started to permeate the galaxy. Human art, human literature, human philosophies, once seen as quaint or backward, were now studied and admired. It wasn't because humans forced these things onto others. On the contrary, they never pushed their culture. But after seeing what humans were capable of, other species couldn't help but wonder what made them so unique. Scholars and historians studied Earth's history, dissecting its wars, its revolutions, its triumphs and tragedies. They wanted to understand the source of that deep, unshakable resilience. What they found wasn't a single answer, but a tapestry of experiences, hardships, and a relentless determination to survive. Even as the Zyphar shifted their focus to peaceful pursuits, their leaders never forgot the human message. It remained unspoken but ever present in their decision-making. Each time they considered expanding their influence, each time they thought about rebuilding their fleets, they remembered the humans' final warning. And so they hesitated, always pulling back at the last moment, always choosing diplomacy over aggression. The galaxy as a whole grew quieter, more cooperative. The memory of the humans' overwhelming response to the Zyphar's aggression served as a deterrent not just to the Zyphar, but to every species. It wasn't fear alone that kept them in check. It was respect. Respect for a species that had shown unimaginable strength, but chose not to dominate. Respect for a species that valued peace enough to defend it with unmatched precision. Respect for a species that had faced countless internal struggles, yet emerged as a force capable of reshaping the galaxy's balance of power. And so, the humans remained a mystery. They didn't expand their territory, didn't issue further warnings, didn't seek to become rulers of the galaxy. They simply stood firm, their silence a constant reminder of the consequences of provocation. The galaxy moved on, but the story lingered, growing into a legend passed down through generations. It became more than a tale of war. It became a parable, a lesson about underestimating those who fight not for conquest, but for survival. And as the stars continued to shift in their orbits, as civilizations rose and fell, one truth remained constant. No one dared make humans angry again.